The morning sun peeked through faded curtains as Rose Jackson opened her eyes to face another day in Montgomery, Alabama, 1963. The wooden floor creaked beneath her feet as she slipped out of bed, careful not to wake her mother sleeping in the next room. At 32, Rose still lived in her childhood home, not from lack of ambition but from a deep sense of duty. Her mother's health had been failing since Rose's father passed 5 years ago, and someone needed to be there to help. Rose's morning routine never changed. Wash face, brush teeth, put on the kettle for her mother's tea, then 10 minutes to herself on the back porch. Those 10 minutes were sacred. The world was quiet then, the air still cool, and she could almost imagine that the day ahead would unfold without reminding her of all the invisible lines that divided her city. Another day to make Daddy proud, she whispered to herself, watching a cardinal hop along the fence. Her father had been a respected high school teacher before heart trouble took him too early. He'd taught Rose that education was the path to true freedom. They can stop us from sitting at their counters, he'd often say, but they can't stop what happens in here, tapping his temple with a knowing smile. As she sipped her coffee, Rose mentally prepared for her workday at the Pine Street Library. She'd been there 8 years now, working her way up from shelving books to becoming the head librarian in the colored section. A small room with donated books at the back of the main library. It wasn't ideal, but she'd turned that space into something special, especially for the neighborhood children who came after school. The kettle whistled, calling her back inside. Her mother was awake now, sitting up in bed with silver-streaked hair framing a face that had once been as smooth as Rose's. "Morning, baby," her mother said, voice still thick with sleep. "You making those cinnamon buns today?" "Tuesday is cinnamon bun day," Rose smiled, handing her mother the cup of tea. "It's Wednesday, Mama. Tuesday was yesterday." "Is it now?" Her mother looked genuinely surprised. These small confusions had been happening more frequently lately. Well, a woman my age is entitled to lose track now and then. After helping her mother dress and making a simple breakfast of oatmeal with sliced bananas, Rose walked 3 houses down to Mrs. Taylor's place. The arrangement had worked well for the past year. Mrs. Taylor, a widow in her 60s, would come sit with Rose's mother during work hours in exchange for Rose handling her grocery shopping and yard work on weekends. She had a good night, Rose told Mrs. Taylor at the door, but she's thinking it's Tuesday, so just go with it if it comes up again. The walk to the bus stop took exactly 12 minutes. Rose knew because she timed it daily, leaving her house at 7:48 to catch the 8:05 bus. Being late wasn't an option. Not for someone like her in a city like this. The bus was already half full when it arrived, and she took her usual spot toward the back, nodding at the familiar faces, Mr. Wilson, who worked as a janitor at the courthouse, Dorothy, who cleaned houses in the wealthy part of town, and a few others who shared this daily journey. Rose pulled out a small notebook from her purse and reviewed her to-do list for the day. The children's reading hour needed a new theme for next month. The biography section needed reorganizing, and she had promised to help Thomas Brown with his college application. Essays after closing time. Thomas was special, a bright, 17-year-old with a mind for mathematics and science, who dreamed of becoming an engineer. Rose saw in him echoes of what her father had wanted for her, though her own college dreams had faded when family needs took precedence. She'd helped 4 students get into college over the past 3 years, each acceptance letter feeling like a personal victory. The library building came into view as Rose stepped off the bus. The imposing brick structure with tall white columns always stirred mixed feelings in her heart. She loved books and what they represented, windows to worlds beyond Montgomery. But she couldn't ignore that she entered through the side door while white patrons used the grand front entrance. "Morning." "Miss Jackson," called the groundskeeper, an elderly white man named Harold who'd been the only staff member to call her Miss from her first day. "Morning, Harold. Those roses are looking healthy today. Got a new fertilizer working wonders. I'll bring you some for your mama's garden next week." These small kindnesses kept hope alive in Rose's heart. The idea that on a person-to-person level, things could improve, that not everyone saw the color of her skin before seeing her humanity. Inside, Rose switched on the lights in her small domain. The colored section was essentially a large room that had once been a storage area, with 4 tables, 20 chairs, and bookshelves that Rose kept meticulously organized. Despite its limitations, she'd transformed it with bright educational posters, a reading corner with cushions for the little ones, and always a vase of fresh flowers on the checkout desk. Today, it was daisies from her mother's garden. Before opening to the public, Rose had an hour to sort through a donation box that had arrived yesterday. This was always like Christmas morning, discovering what treasures might be hidden among cast-offs. Most donations were outdated textbooks or well-worn novels, but occasionally, something special appeared. Today it was a nearly new copy of James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time, published just months ago. Rose ran her fingers over the cover, excitement building at the thought of reading it herself before putting it into circulation. By 10 o'clock, the first visitors began to arrive, mostly older folks coming to read newspapers or check out books. Rose greeted each by name, asking after family members or health concerns from previous conversations. The real rush would come after school let out, when 20 to 30 children would flood in, some to do homework, others just seeking a safe place to spend the afternoon. During a quiet moment, Rose opened a letter she'd been carrying in her purse for 3 days now. It was from the State Library Association, responding to her application for their scholarship program, an opportunity for library workers to earn a degree in library science through weekend courses. The program had recently begun accepting Negro applicants, and Rose had spent weeks perfecting her application. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded the letter. "Dear Miss Jackson, we regret to inform you." Her heart sank before finishing the sentence. Third rejection in 2 years. Each one hurt in a different way, though she never let anyone see it. Her father would have told her to try again. That persistence was key. But some days the weight of pushing against invisible barriers felt too heavy to bear. Rose refolded the letter and tucked it into her desk drawer. No time for disappointment now. Mrs. Porter's third-grade class would be arriving in 20 minutes for their monthly library introduction, and Rose needed to prepare. She'd created a special scavenger hunt to teach them about using the card catalog, with small prizes she'd purchased with her own money. Watching young faces light up when they discovered the joy of books was what kept Rose going through disappointments. She remembered being 9 years old herself, when the traveling bookmobile had parked near her school. The white librarian had been unexpectedly kind, helping Rose find books about horses, her childhood obsession. That single interaction had planted a seed that grew into her life's calling. As she arranged chairs in a circle for the children, Rose thought about the community meeting happening tonight at Bethel Church. Her friend Gloria had been trying to convince her to attend for weeks. They were organizing carpools to the big march in Birmingham next month, where that young minister, Dr. King, would be speaking. Gloria was deeply involved, carrying protest signs and singing freedom songs. Rose had always kept her distance from such activities, believing as her father did that change would come through education rather than confrontation. "Be so good they can't ignore you," he'd advised. "Excel so brilliantly they have to make room." But lately she'd begun to wonder if that approach was too slow, too patient. News reports showed children being attacked with fire hoses just for asking to be treated as equal human beings. How many generations would need to excel brilliantly before true change came? These thoughts swirled in Rose's mind as the classroom of excited 8-year-olds filed in, their teacher giving stern warnings about inside voices and careful handling of books. Rose pushed her concerns aside and put on her brightest smile. For the next hour, the children's enthusiasm as they discovered new books was the only world that mattered. The rest of the day passed in comfortable routine, helping a young mother find simple recipes, showing an elderly man how to use the magnifying glass for reading small print, and guiding Thomas through his application essay during her lunch break. As closing time approached, Rose found herself thinking about that church meeting again. Perhaps she would go, just to listen. Her father had always taught her to respect different approaches to solving problems, even if they weren't the paths he would choose. And lately she'd been feeling a restlessness, a sense that being excellent and dignified might not be enough in a world that seemed determined not to see her excellence or her dignity. "I'm just going to listen," she told herself as she locked up the library side entrance, just to hear what they have to say. Little did Rose know that this small decision, to simply listen, would be the first step toward a chain of events that would change not only her life, but the lives of countless others. For now, though, she was just a librarian heading home on a Wednesday evening in Montgomery, Alabama, 1963, carrying a borrowed copy of James Baldwin tucked safely in her bag. Rose didn't attend the meeting at Bethel Church that evening. After walking halfway there, the skies opened up without warning, sending sheets of rain pouring down. With no umbrella and her good shoes already soaked, Rose decided to head home instead. Maybe it was a sign that she wasn't ready to step into that world just yet. The rain continued through the night and into the next morning. Rose watched from the library windows as people hurried by with newspapers over their heads, splashing through puddles that had formed in the uneven sidewalks. The weather kept most visitors away, leaving Rose alone with her thoughts and the comforting smell of old books. By late afternoon, the rain had settled into a steady drizzle. Rose checked her watch, 5:15 p.m. Thomas hadn't shown up for his scheduled essay review, which wasn't like him. She hoped he was just waiting out the weather. After straightening up and locking the side door, Rose decided to take the slightly longer route home, passing by Thomas's neighborhood to check if he was sick. The streets were quieter than usual, empty except for a few cars splashing by. Rose walked carefully, trying to avoid the deeper puddles. Her worn shoes were already damp from the morning, and she couldn't afford to ruin them completely. Her mind wandered as she walked, thinking about the next day's tasks, wondering if she should make her mother's favorite stew for dinner. The sound of sirens pulled her from these thoughts. 2 police cars sped past, their lights flashing against the gray evening sky. Rose instinctively stepped further back from the curb. Police activity in this part of town rarely meant anything good. 4 blocks later, Rose could see a small crowd gathered near the corner store owned by Mr. Chen, a Chinese immigrant who had somehow managed to establish a business that served both white and colored customers, though on different days of the week. Today was Thursday, colored shopping day. The police cars she had seen earlier were parked haphazardly in front of the store, lights still flashing. Rose hesitated. The smart thing would be to cross the street, avoid whatever trouble was happening. But what if Thomas or someone else she knew was involved? She couldn't just walk by. What happened? She asked an elderly man standing at the edge of the small crowd. Somebody robbed Mr. Chen, he replied, keeping his voice low. Hit him pretty hard, too. They took him to the hospital. Rose's hand flew to her mouth. That's terrible. Did they catch who did it? The man shook his head. Police looking for a colored woman in a dark coat. That's all I heard. Rose glanced down at her own navy blue coat, suddenly self-conscious. But so many women wore similar coats, especially on rainy days. She moved closer, trying to see if anyone needed help. That's when Officer Benson noticed her. Rose recognized him immediately. He'd pulled over the library's delivery driver twice last month for suspicious behavior, which meant nothing more than a black man driving a decent vehicle. The officer's eyes narrowed as he took in Rose's appearance lingering on her coat. You there, he called out, pointing at Rose. Come over here. The small crowd parted. Rose felt her heart skip, but reminded herself she had nothing to fear. She was a respected librarian who had never been in trouble. Yes, officer, she said, keeping her voice steady and polite. Where are you coming from? Officer Benson asked, looming over her. A second officer, younger with freckles scattered across his pale face, moved to stand beside him. The Pine Street Library, sir. I work there. I'm heading home now. Got any ID? The younger officer demanded. Rose reached for her purse, movements deliberately slow and careful. Yes, I have my library card and... She matches the description, Officer Benson interrupted, speaking to his partner as if Rose weren't there. Female colored blue coat. That's half the women in this neighborhood, Rose said before she could stop herself. Immediately she regretted speaking up. Officer Benson's face hardened. Empty your purse. Right now, people were watching. Rose felt heat rising to her cheeks as she carefully removed the contents of her purse. Her wallet with $3.47, a handkerchief, a small notebook, her house keys, a comb, and the borrowed Baldwin book. Where'd you get that book? The younger officer asked, picking it up with a suspicious look. It's from the library where I work, Rose answered, struggling to keep her voice level. I'm the librarian there. Officer Benson snorted. Sure you are. And I'm the governor. He turned to the small crowd. Anyone here know this woman? A few faces looked away. Rose recognized Mrs. Winters from church and Mr. Phillips, whose grandson came to her reading hours, but they both averted their eyes. She couldn't blame them. Nobody wanted police attention. "I've worked at the library for 8 years, Rose said. "You can call hands on the wall," Officer Benson interrupted, his voice sharp. "Now what?" "But I haven't." The younger officer grabbed Rose's arm, spinning her around and pushing her against the brick wall of the building next to Mr. Chen's store. The rough surface scraped her cheek as her purse contents scattered on the wet sidewalk. "We got a report of a colored woman in a blue coat robbing the store," Officer Benson said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "You fit the description and you're acting suspicious." "I didn't rob anyone," Rose said, voice shaking now. "I was at the library until just now. There are people who can verify—" "Quiet!" the young officer snapped, kicking her feet further apart. "Spread your legs." The humiliation burned worse than the scrape on her cheek. Rose had heard stories of this happening to others, had listened to warnings about being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But she'd always believed her education, her respectability, her careful adherence to every unwritten rule would protect her. She was wrong. The officers handcuffed her right there on the sidewalk. The cold metal bit into her wrists as Officer Benson announced they were taking her in for questioning. Rose tried once more to explain, to ask them to call the library or even Mrs. Taylor, who would have seen her at work, but her words fell on deaf ears. "Please," she said, rain mixing with tears on her face. "My mother is waiting for me. She needs her medication. She'll be worried. Should have thought about your mama before you decided to rob someone," the younger officer said, pushing her toward the police car. Just then, a voice called out from the crowd. "Wait!" A white woman in her 50s stepped forward, clutching an umbrella. Rose recognized her as Mrs. Howard, who sometimes borrowed books for her bedridden sister. "This woman works at the library," Mrs. Howard said, addressing Officer Benson. "I saw her there myself earlier today." Officer Benson frowned. "You sure about that, ma'am?" "Positive," Mrs. Howard replied. "She helped me find a gardening book. Been working there for years." The officers exchanged glances. "Still need to take her in for questioning," Benson said, but with less conviction now. Actually, another voice joined in. It was Mr. Chen's son, David, a college student who helped at the store on weekends. "I saw the woman who did it. She was much shorter and her coat was more like a raincoat. Plastic looking. This isn't her." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then, with obvious reluctance, Officer Benson unlocked the handcuffs. "Fine, you can go. But don't leave town." Rose rubbed her wrists, fighting back tears. Her belongings still lay scattered on the wet ground. Silently, she knelt to gather them, acutely aware of the eyes watching her. The Baldwin book had fallen into a puddle, its pages now swollen with dirty water. "Thank you," she whispered to Mrs. Howard and David as she stood up. Mrs. Howard just nodded uncomfortably and hurried away. David gave her a small smile before turning back to the store. "Next time," Officer Benson said quietly as he leaned close to Rose, "don't be where you don't belong." Rose walked away on shaking legs, clutching her damaged belongings to her chest. The rain had soaked through her coat, and her wrists throbbed where the handcuffs had been. But worse than the physical discomfort was the burning sense of injustice and shame. Everyone had seen. Everyone knew. The 12-minute walk home took nearly 30 that evening. Rose stopped twice to collect herself, hiding in the shadows between streetlights to wipe away tears. What would she tell her mother? How would she face the people who had witnessed her humiliation when she returned to work tomorrow? By the time Rose reached her street, the rain had finally stopped. The porch light was on, and through the window she could see Mrs. Taylor peering anxiously outside. Rose took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders before walking the final steps home. "Lord have mercy, child. What happened to you?" Mrs. Taylor exclaimed when she opened the door. Rose opened her mouth to explain but found she couldn't speak. Instead, tears came again and Mrs. Taylor pulled her into a tight embrace. "Your mama's been worried sick," Mrs. Taylor whispered. "I told her you probably stayed late at the library because of the rain. She's resting now." Rose nodded gratefully. Don't tell her what happened." "Your face is scratched," Mrs. Taylor said, gently touching Rose's cheek. "And your good coat is ruined? What did they do to you?" "They thought I robbed Mr. Chen's store," Rose managed to say, her voice barely audible. "They handcuffed me right there on the street. Everyone saw," Mrs. Taylor's eyes flashed with anger. Those police had no right. No right at all. What does right have to do with it? Rose asked bitterly. I did everything the way I was supposed to. I was polite. I explained. I didn't resist. None of that mattered. Later that night, after her mother had gone to sleep, Rose sat alone in the dark kitchen. The house was quiet except for the occasional drip from the leaky faucet. Tomorrow, she would have to decide whether to go back to work, whether to pretend nothing had happened, whether to continue believing that dignity and education alone could change a world determined to humiliate her. But tonight, something new and unfamiliar burned inside her chest, not just shame and humiliation, but anger. Pure, clarifying anger that cut through the fog of shock. She thought about all the times she'd heard similar stories and had privately wondered what those people had done to attract police attention. She thought about her father's teaching that excellence would protect her, and for the first time, she questioned whether he had been wrong. The Baldwin book lay on the table, its pages drying in rippled waves. Rose opened it carefully, finding a passage she'd read earlier that week. To act is to be committed, and to be committed is to be in danger. Until today, she'd never truly understood what that meant. 3 days passed. Rose didn't leave the house. She told her mother she had the flu, which wasn't entirely a lie. Her body ached, her head throbbed, and waves of nausea came whenever she remembered the feel of handcuffs on her wrists or the eyes of the crowd watching her humiliation. Mrs. Taylor brought soup and didn't ask questions. She simply said, "When you're ready to talk, I'm ready to listen." Then she'd sit with Rose's mother, the two older women discussing their gardens or church gossip as if nothing had changed, as if the world hadn't cracked open. On the first day, Rose called the library and asked for sick leave. Miss Patterson, the white-head librarian who rarely set foot in the colored section, sounded surprised but agreed to find someone to cover. "We expect you back Monday," she added before hanging up, not bothering to ask if Rose was all right. On the second day, Rose stood in front of her closet, staring at the blue coat now hanging limply on its hanger. She'd tried to clean it, but the mud stains remained, visible reminders she couldn't scrub away. With sudden fury, she yanked it down and stuffed it into a paper bag for the charity collection. On the third day, Rose sat on her bed with a blank piece of paper and a pen. "Dear Editor," she wrote, then stopped. What exactly did she want to say? That she'd been humiliated? That the system was unfair? Everyone already knew these things. Her words wouldn't change anything. She crumpled the paper and threw it across the room. That afternoon, someone knocked at the door. Rose was alone. Mrs. Taylor had taken her mother to a doctor's appointment. Reluctantly, she opened the door to find Gloria standing there, a look of concern etched across her face. "Where have you been?" Gloria asked, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "I went to the library yesterday and they said you were sick." "You don't look sick, Rose. You look angry." Rose hadn't seen her reflection lately, avoiding mirrors as if her shame might be visible there. "I'm fine," she said automatically. Gloria shook her head. "Thomas told me what happened. His cousin saw the whole thing." Rose felt her chest tighten. "Everyone saw. Everyone knows." "Yes, they do," Gloria agreed, following Rose into the kitchen. "And that's exactly why you need to speak up. Officially." Rose filled the kettle and set it on the stove, needing something to do with her hands. "Speak up to who? The police department that employs those officers? The newspaper that prints what they want to print? The mayor who needs their votes? Who exactly is going to listen?" "All of them," Gloria said simply. "And if they don't listen, we make them hear us." The kettle began to whistle, its pitch rising to match the tension in Rose's chest. "That's your way, Gloria, not mine. Your way was keeping your head down and hoping education would change everything. How's that working out?" The words stung because they were true. Rose poured hot water into 2 cups, dropping tea bags in with more force than necessary. Gloria's voice softened. "I'm not here to argue with you. I'm here because a woman I consider my friend was hurt and I want to help." Rose sat heavily at the kitchen table. "I don't know what to do," she admitted. I wasn't raised to make trouble." "Standing up for yourself isn't making trouble," Gloria countered. "The trouble already exists. You're just refusing to pretend it doesn't." They sat in silence for a while, sipping tea that grew cold too quickly. Finally, Rose spoke. "What would I even say? That I was handcuffed and embarrassed? That happens to people every day. Yes, it does, Gloria agreed. And that's exactly why it needs to be said out loud over and over until it stops happening. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded newspaper. There's a reporter at the Southern Courier, a colored paper out of Atlanta with a small office here. His name is Daniel Williams. He's been documenting cases like yours. Rose took the paper, scanning the headline. Police procedures questioned after wrongful arrest. The story was about a college student in Birmingham who'd been held for 6 hours because he matched a description. There are more stories like this, Gloria continued, but most people are too afraid to speak up. You have something many don't, Rose, respectability. You're educated. You work at a library. Your father was a teacher. People know you. That gives your words power. Rose shook her head. It didn't give me power when it mattered. No, Gloria agreed. But it might give you power now. If they can do this to Rose Jackson, the librarian who helps their children with homework and never causes trouble, then who's safe? That's a question people need to ask themselves. Rose traced the rim of her teacup with one finger. My mother would be terrified. Yes, Gloria said honestly. And she should be. This isn't safe. Speaking up never is. But ask yourself, what would your father say? That question lingered in Rose's mind long after Gloria left. What would her father say? He had always advocated for dignity and excellence, for rising above through education, but he had also believed in justice and truth. He wouldn't want her to suffer in silence. The next morning, Rose put on her second-best dress, fixed her hair, and walked to the small office of the Southern Courier. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat, but her steps remained steady. Daniel Williams was younger than she expected, with wire-rimmed glasses and a serious expression that softened when she introduced herself. Gloria called ahead, he explained, offering Rose a seat in the cramped office. She said you had a story that needs telling. For the next hour, Rose spoke. She described the incident in detail, the handcuffs, the scrape on her cheek, the scattered contents of her purse, the ruined book, the watching crowd, the final warning to not be where she didn't belong. As she spoke, Daniel took careful notes, occasionally asking questions but mostly just listening. Would you be willing to go on record with this? He asked when she finished. Full name and everything? Rose hesitated. What would that mean exactly? It means your name in the paper. It means people will know it was you. Some will support you, others. He shrugged, not needing to finish the thought. Will it make any difference? Rose asked quietly. Daniel set down his pen. One story alone? Maybe not. But enough stories together? That's how change happens. People need to see these aren't isolated incidents. There's a pattern. Rose thought about the Baldwin book, about commitment and danger. She thought about her father, about her mother, about the children who visited her library. Most of all, she thought about standing handcuffed in the rain, stripped of dignity despite a lifetime of doing everything right. Yes, she finally said. Use my name. The story ran the following week. A small article on page 3. Local librarian wrongfully detained. Handcuffed on street. It included quotes from Rose and a statement from the police department, claiming they had followed standard procedures based on available information at the time. Rose brought 5 copies of the paper home, hiding them from her mother who still didn't know the full story. The article felt simultaneously monumental and insignificant, her experience captured in a few column inches that most people would skim past. What difference could it possibly make? The answer came sooner than she expected. The following Sunday, Pastor Reynolds mentioned her by name during his sermon. Our sister Rose had the courage to speak truth, he said, his deep voice filling the church. How many more stories remain untold? How long will we accept being treated as less than children of God? Rose felt dozens of eyes turned toward her, some curious, some supportive, some clearly uncomfortable. Her mother squeezed her hand, confusion evident in her eyes. Rose hadn't told her about the article. After the service, people approached hesitantly. Mrs. Winters, who had looked away during the incident, came first. I'm sorry I didn't speak up, she said quietly. I was afraid. I understand, Rose replied, surprised to find she truly did. Others came with similar sentiments, with their own stories, with questions about what happened next. Rose had no answers for them. She hadn't planned beyond telling her story once. That changed when Gloria introduced her to Anthony Reynolds, Pastor Reynolds' nephew who had recently graduated from law school in Washington. He'd returned to Montgomery to work with the NAACP's legal team. "We need to file an official complaint," Anthony said when they met at Gloria's house that evening. "It won't go anywhere, these complaints rarely do. But it creates a record, and records matter." "What would I have to do?" Rose asked. "Tell your story again, this time in a formal statement. Then be prepared for them to try to discredit you." "Discredit me? How?" Anthony's smile was grim. "They'll look for anything. Unpaid parking tickets, late library books, neighbors who don't like you. Anything to say you're not credible or you deserved what happened." Rose thought about her life. Careful, quiet, respectable. "They won't find much." "No," Anthony agreed. "Which is exactly why your case is important. You're the perfect complainant." Rose didn't feel perfect. She felt scared and small and still angry. But something else was growing alongside the anger. A sense of purpose. If her respectability couldn't protect her from injustice, perhaps it could be weaponized against the system that had humiliated her. "I'll do it," she said. The process was every bit as intimidating as Anthony had warned. Rose spent hours at the NAACP office going over every detail, signing statements, preparing for questions that might come. Her mother finally learned the truth when 2 white police officers came to their home, asking pointed questions about Rose's criminal associations. "My daughter has never been in trouble a day in her life," her mother had declared, standing as tall as her frail frame allowed. Later she'd asked Rose, "Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't want you to worry," Rose answered honestly. Her mother had simply nodded. "Your father would be proud. Scared for you, but proud." Those words carried Rose through the next weeks as her complaint made its way through the system, as whispers followed her at the library, as some parents stopped bringing their children to reading hour, as anonymous callers hung up when she answered the phone. This wasn't the life she had planned. But as Gloria had said on the day Rose filed her complaint, sometimes life doesn't ask what you planned. It asks what you're willing to do when the moment comes. The moment had come for Rose Jackson, and against all expectations, even her own, she had answered it. Rose's official complaint against Officers Benson and Miller was dismissed after a 3-minute hearing. Judge Walter Hampton, who had gone fishing with Officer Benson's father every summer for 20 years, declared there was insufficient evidence of procedural violation. Anthony wasn't surprised. "This is how it always goes," he told Rose as they walked down the courthouse steps. But that doesn't mean it was worthless. Rose wasn't so sure. The 6 weeks since filing the complaint had been difficult. Someone had thrown a rock through the library window during her reading hour. Miss Patterson had reduced her hours, claiming budget cuts that somehow affected only Rose's position. Worst of all, her mother's health had declined, the stress of the situation wearing on her already fragile heart. "What was the point?" Rose asked, her voice hollow. "Nothing's changed." Anthony stopped walking and turned to face her. "Look around you," Rose glanced up. At the bottom of the courthouse steps stood at least 30 people. Neighbors, church members, some of the parents whose children visited her library. They had come to support her, knowing full well the complaint would be dismissed. Gloria stood at the center holding a handmade sign. "Dignity cannot be detained." "That's the point," Anthony said quietly. "You're not alone anymore. None of us are." That afternoon they gathered at Bethel Church, the meeting Rose had missed because of rain on the night everything changed. The small classroom was packed, people standing along walls and sitting on windowsills. Pastor Reynolds opened with a prayer, then turned to Rose. "Would you share your story one more time?" Rose had told it so many times by now, to the reporter, to Anthony in her official statement. Each telling had gotten easier, the words finding their shape, the emotion controlled but still present. But this time felt different. These weren't officials or lawyers. These were her people. She stood slowly, smoothing her skirt with damp palms. "I'm not a speaker," she began. "Just talk to us like we're at your library," called Mrs. Taylor from the back. A ripple of gentle laughter broke the tension. So Rose talked. Simply and directly she described what had happened that rainy evening. The handcuffs, the scrape on her cheek, the scattered contents of her purse, the eyes watching, the final warning, "Don't be where you don't belong." When she finished, the room was quiet. Then Mrs. Winters stood up. Last year, my boy Raymond was stopped walking home from his job at the hotel. They made him lie face down on the ground for 20 minutes while they searched him. Said he looked like someone who'd stolen a car. Her voice shook. He was wearing his hotel uniform. He was 16 years old. One by one, others stood. A delivery driver detained for suspicious behavior. A nurse accused of stealing medicine. A high school teacher handcuffed in front of his students because he matched a description. Each story different, each story the same. Gloria stepped forward when the sharing finally slowed. This is happening all over, not just in Montgomery. But most people stay quiet because they're afraid or ashamed or they think nothing will change. Or all three, someone called out, prompting knowing nods. What do we do about it? Asked Thomas, who had been silent until now. They're not listening. Anthony cleared his throat. We document everything. Every incident, every name, every detail. We create a record they can't ignore. And then what? Thomas pressed. Then we show them we won't accept being treated this way anymore, Gloria said. We organize, we march. We make ourselves so visible they can't look away. Rose listened, surprised to find herself nodding. 6 weeks ago, the thought of marching would have terrified her. Now it seemed inevitable. After the meeting, Anthony and Gloria asked Rose to stay behind. Pastor Reynolds joined them, along with 3 others Rose recognized from civil rights meetings she'd begun attending. We want to make this official, Gloria explained. A real campaign with a name and a purpose. And we want you to help lead it, Rose blinked in surprise. Me? But I don't know anything about organizing. You know how to tell your story in a way that makes people listen, Anthony said. And you have something most activists don't. Respectability that crosses lines. White people who'd never listened to me might listen to you. The dignified librarian, Pastor Reynolds added with a gentle smile. Your father built a legacy of respect in this community. That carries weight. Rose thought about her father, wondering again what he would think of all this. Would he approve of her stepping into the spotlight? Or would he worry she was putting herself in danger? What would we call it? She asked, not quite agreeing, but not refusing either. The Dignity Campaign, Gloria said without hesitation. Because that's what they take from us, and that's what we're demanding back. 2 days later, Rose stood on the steps of Bethel Church for their first press conference. Only 3 reporters showed up. One from the Southern Courier, one from a small radio station, and a skeptical-looking white man from the Montgomery Advertiser, who left halfway through. Rose read a prepared statement about the newly formed Dignity Campaign, her voice shaking at first but growing stronger with each word. When she finished with, "They took my dignity for 2 hours. I won't let them take my voice forever." Only a handful of people were there to hear it. That didn't go well, Rose said afterward, disappointment evident in her voice. It went exactly as expected, Anthony replied. Change doesn't happen overnight. The next few weeks proved him right. The Dignity Campaign began gathering testimonies, creating a form people could fill out detailing their experiences with police. Rose organized the library's meeting room into a makeshift office, using her skills to create files, document cases, and identify patterns. Each week, they sent a report to the mayor's office, the police chief, and local newspapers. Each week, they were ignored, but something was happening beneath the surface. People who had never spoken about their experiences began sharing them. The Sunday gatherings at Bethel grew larger. When the Montgomery Advertiser ran a dismissive article calling the campaign unnecessary agitation by malcontents, donations arrived from unexpected places, including an anonymous envelope with $50 and a note reading "Keep Going" in handwriting Rose, recognized as belonging to Mrs. Howard, the white woman who had spoken up for her that rainy night. Most surprising was Rose herself. The quiet librarian discovered she had a gift for public speaking, for distilling complex ideas into simple, powerful statements. "We're not asking for special treatment," she would say. "We're demanding equal treatment under the law. Nothing more, nothing less." 3 months after the courthouse dismissal, a photographer from a national magazine attended one of their Sunday meetings. The Dignity Campaign had expanded to Birmingham and Selma, with similar groups documenting cases and sending reports. The photographer took pictures throughout the meeting, but it was an unplanned moment that caught his eye. Rose, standing by the window, tears streaming down her face as an elderly man described being humiliated by police in front of his grandchildren. That photograph, published alongside a short article about the campaign, changed everything. Letters poured in from across the country. A law firm in New York offered pro bono assistance. Most significantly, established civil rights organizations began reaching out, offering resources and support. "We need to do something bigger," Gloria announced at their planning meeting 6 months after Rose's incident. "Something they can't ignore." "Like what?" Rose asked. "A march through downtown Montgomery. Peaceful but powerful." The room went quiet. A march meant visibility. Visibility meant vulnerability. Everyone understood the risks. "When?" Rose finally asked. Planning the march consumed the next 8 weeks. Rose took a leave of absence from the library, partly because the work demanded it, partly because Miss Patterson had made it clear her activism wasn't welcome there. Her mother worried but supported her, sitting at the kitchen table helping address envelopes and listening as Rose practiced her speeches. The day before the march, Rose visited her father's grave. "I'm scared," she admitted to the silent headstone. "Not just of what might happen tomorrow, but of who I'm becoming. This isn't the path you laid out for me." She placed fresh flowers beside his name. "But I hope you'd understand." Dawn broke clear and cool on the day of the march. Rose dressed carefully in her best Sunday dress, the blue one her father had bought her for college graduation. As she pinned her hair, her hands were steady. The fear remained, but something stronger had grown alongside it: resolve. 3,000 people gathered at Bethel Church, far more than they had dared hope for. Faces black and white, young and old. Signs reading, "Dignity cannot be detained, and justice sees no color, and we belong everywhere." Among the crowd, Rose spotted Officer Miller's mother, the younger officer who had helped handcuff her that rainy evening. Their eyes met briefly before the older woman looked away. At precisely noon, with Rose, Gloria, and Pastor Reynolds at the front, the march began. They moved in dignified silence down streets Rose had walked her entire life, past the library where she had worked, past Mr. Chen's store where she had been handcuffed, toward the courthouse where her complaint had been dismissed. At first, the sidewalks were empty, windows shuttered. Then gradually people emerged, watching, some hostile, some curious, some joining the march as it passed. By the time they reached the courthouse steps, their numbers had grown even larger. Rose stepped up to the makeshift podium, looking out over the crowd, cameras flashing. 6 months ago, she had stood in this exact spot, defeated and questioning the point of speaking up at all. Now she understood. One voice alone might be silenced, but thousands of voices joined in purpose, created a sound that even the most determined couldn't ignore. "We are here today," she began, her voice carrying across the hushed crowd, "not just to protest what happened to me or to any individual among us. We are here because dignity is not a privilege, it is a right." From the corner of her eye, Rose spotted police officers forming a line, some carrying batons, others unrolling fire hoses. Fear flickered but did not take hold. They might silence today's march with force, but they couldn't stop what had already begun. The water hit with shocking force, cold and merciless. Rose felt herself knocked backward, struggling to breathe as the powerful stream from fire hoses turned peaceful protesters into scattered, soaked victims. Screams filled the air. Some ran. Others fell to the ground, covering their heads as police moved in with batons and dogs. "Stay together," Gloria shouted, her voice barely audible above the chaos. "Don't run!" Rose couldn't run even if she wanted to. Her legs seemed frozen in place as she watched officers grabbing people, including Anthony, who had been standing right beside her moments before. Pastor Reynolds moved to intervene and was immediately handcuffed. A police officer approached Rose, baton raised. She recognized him instantly, Officer Benson, the same man who had handcuffed her on that rainy evening nearly a year ago. For a moment their eyes met. Recognition flickered across his face, followed by something Rose couldn't quite identify. Anger? Shame? Whatever it was, he lowered his baton slightly and moved past her toward an older man who was helping a woman to her feet. Cameras flashed continually. Reporters who had come expecting a standard protest were now documenting a brutal response to peaceful marchers. A photographer from Life magazine captured the moment a German shepherd lunged at a teenage boy, who stood with his hands raised in surrender. By nightfall, 47 protesters had been arrested, including Anthony and Pastor Reynolds. Rose spent hours at the police station, working with volunteers to arrange bail. Her dress was still damp, her hair ruined, but she moved with quiet purpose, clipboard in hand. organizing names and making phone calls. A white reporter from the New York Times approached as she worked. "Miss Jackson, I'd like to ask about what happened today." Rose looked up, exhaustion etched in every line of her face. "What happened?" "Exactly what we've been trying to tell people has been happening all along. The images from that day appeared in newspapers across the country. The brutality captured on film shocked many who had been able to ignore written reports or dismiss verbal accounts. Suddenly, Montgomery was again at the center of national attention, and the Dignity campaign was flooded with support and criticism. Mayor Thompson held a press conference condemning the protesters for inciting violence and disrupting public order. Police Chief Wilson defended his officers, claiming they had responded to aggressive actions from marchers. But the photographs told a different story. Peaceful people with signs being met with water cannons, dogs, and batons. Rose received her first death threat 3 days after the march, a typed note pushed under her door while she was at church. She handed it to Anthony without comment when he was released from jail. He read it, his face grim, then tucked it into a folder already thick with similar threats against other organizers. "We should get you out of town for a while," he suggested. Rose shook her head. "This is my home. I'm not running." But she did agree to move her mother to her aunt's house in Atlanta, away from the tension and potential danger. The night before her mother left, they sat on the porch swing, rocking gently as they had done since Rose was a child. "Your father would be proud," her mother said quietly. "Scared for you like I am, but proud." "I'm scared too," Rose admitted. "Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and wonder what I've gotten myself into. This isn't the life I planned." Her mother patted her hand. "Plans are what we make before life shows us what we're meant to do." The months following the march were difficult but productive. The Dignity campaign continued documenting cases of police misconduct, but now their reports were picked up by national papers. Donations allowed them to hire a small staff, including a lawyer dedicated to representing victims. Rose took on the role of spokesperson, traveling to churches and community centers across 5 states to share her story and help others tell theirs. The movement faced constant challenges. Their office was vandalized twice. Supporters lost jobs. Anthony's car was set on fire. But for every act of intimidation, there seemed to be a new ally, including, surprisingly, a retired white police officer named James Harmon, who reached out to Rose after seeing her speak at a church in Birmingham. "Not all of us wanted things to be this way," he told her during their private meeting. "Some of us tried to change things from the inside and couldn't." He offered to speak publicly about the unwritten policies that encouraged officers to use intimidation in black neighborhoods. His testimony became a powerful addition to their campaign, bringing credibility that was hard to dismiss. When joined by another retired officer, the impact was even greater. Cracks were forming in the wall of institutional denial. A year and a half after Rose's wrongful detention, the first concrete change came. After relentless pressure, including weekly delegations to City Hall and a letter-writing campaign that flooded officials with thousands of messages, the Montgomery City Council narrowly approved the creation of a civilian review board to investigate complaints against police officers. "It's mostly symbolic," Anthony warned at their celebration dinner. "They've stacked it with people who will side with the police." "Symbols matter," Rose replied. "And this is just the beginning." She was right. The review board's existence, however flawed, created a formal process where none had existed before. Similar boards were established in Birmingham and Selma within months, then spread to other cities across the South. 2 years after the march, the State Police Academy announced new mandatory training on constitutional rights and community relations. The training wasn't perfect, but it explicitly prohibited detaining people solely based on vague descriptions and required officers to identify themselves properly during stops. When Rose was invited to address a cadet class, standing before rows of young officers in their crisp uniforms, she felt the full circle of her journey. "I'm not here to tell you that your job isn't difficult or dangerous," she told them. "I'm here to remind you that the power you hold can either build trust or destroy it. And once trust is broken, it takes generations to rebuild." Some cadets looked bored, others hostile, but a few nodded thoughtfully. Change would come slowly, person by person, policy by policy. By 1969, Rose had testified before congressional committees twice, sharing her story and presenting the thousands of documented cases the Dignity Campaign had collected. When federal legislation establishing new accountability standards for law enforcement passed in 1971, the lead sponsor acknowledged her by name, calling her a citizen whose courage reminds us that democracy depends on ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Rose no longer worked at the library. The Dignity Campaign had become her full-time work, evolving from protest to advocacy to education. With foundation funding, they developed training programs for both police departments and communities, teaching conflict resolution and cultural understanding. The work was hard, the progress incremental but undeniably real. On the 10th anniversary of her wrongful detention, Rose stood outside the newly dedicated Community Justice Center in downtown Montgomery. The building housed the expanded Civilian Review Board, a legal aid office, and a training facility where officers and community members could learn together. "When I was handcuffed on the street not far from here," she told the gathered crowd, "I felt completely powerless. But that moment taught me something I might never have learned otherwise, that dignity isn't something others can truly take from you. They can ignore it, they can violate it, but as long as you stand up again and demand it be recognized, your dignity remains." Among those attending was a teenage girl who reminded Rose of herself at that age, serious, observant, with a book tucked under her arm. After the ceremony, the girl approached hesitantly. "Miss Jackson, I'm doing a history project about the Dignity Campaign for school. Could I interview you sometime?" Rose smiled. "History? I suppose it is history now, isn't it?" "Yes, I'd like that very much." Later, walking home alone, Rose passed the corner where Mr. Chen's store had once stood. It was a community center now, with a small garden out front. She paused, remembering the rain, the handcuffs, the humiliation that had changed her life's direction. Officer Benson had retired years ago and moved away. The young Officer Miller had eventually become a detective who surprisingly supported some reforms. Miss Patterson from the library had sent a grudging letter of apology after Rose's first congressional testimony. Even Mayor Thompson had, in his final term, acknowledged that the review board had improved community relations. These weren't the dramatic reversals of children's stories, where villains suddenly see the error of their ways. They were the small, imperfect human adjustments that constitute real change, gradual, uneven, but cumulative. Rose's personal vindication had never come in the form she might have once wanted. No judge had ever ruled her detention improper. No official had ever directly apologized to her. But in the changes that now protected others, in the training that might prevent another librarian from being handcuffed in the rain, she found something better than vindication. She found purpose. As she turned the corner onto her street, a group of children raced past, laughing. One small boy stopped and picked up a book that another had dropped, carefully dusting it off before running to return it. Rose smiled. The world wasn't fixed. The work wasn't finished. But somewhere along the way, a woman who had only wanted to be left alone to lead a quiet life had helped bend the long arc of history just a little more toward justice. And that, she decided as she climbed the steps to her porch, was enough.